Cool. So, good
Comfortable.
evening, everybody, and welcome to the Zwaardkring Malaysia live stream.
Hey, Faris is here.
Hi,
Early.
Faris. Yes, thank you for joining us. Hi, my name is Sasha. I'm joined tonight by Farhan, and we are on lesson five. Five, right? I
I
can
lost
count.
count, honestly.
You lost? Jeez.
Dude, I'm a writer. I don't do numbers.
Right. I believe we're on lesson five of our basic introduction course for sword fighting. Um, Today, I hope that we will be discussing three things. Ansetzen in attack and defense. We will be discussing the Zwei Hangen. And we will be discussing Nachreisen. Yes, both the principle and hopefully, if we have time permitting, the three specific cases of Nachreisen. So with that, let's begin with our greeting. Grüß dich. So, yeah, like I said, today we're gonna do ansetzen and the like. I hope that everybody did the exercises from last week, the basic defenses, as well as the. Let's see, what else did we do last week?
We did a lot of things, man.
Yeah,
The footwork, the
footwork exercises, yeah,
distance.
and the distance exercises. Yeah, those two. Footwork exercises and distance exercises. So just yeah. So if you want to know what that's about, look at last week's stream. Last week we streamed for like way too long. So this week I want to keep things on topic, if you will. So first of all, we were talking about ansetzen, right? Ansetzen, setting on, and so far we've seen this in our basic attacks. So after each basic attack, we would set our tip on our opponent, pointing our sword at our opponent, so that and the thrusts as well after the thrusts. So we set our tip on our opponent to present threat, right? The idea is that if I have Ash here, and Ash is a capable sword fighter. If you get, let's see, I'm going to put him over here. Ash is a capable sword fighter, and he practices ansetzen, right? He practices ansetzen. He is pointing his sword at me, and he's presenting threat at me. Ash is basically saying, if you step closer, I can thrust at you, right? You have to deal with my tip first before you can deal with me. And this gives Ash an advantage because Ash will need to, because I will need to take two movements, first to deal with his tip, and then to deal with him. So it gives him a little bit of extra time and an extra movement to parry or defend against my attack. Whereas if he didn't defend against me at all, I can just straight away attack him, right? His tip is not there, it's not threatening me, he's not in a position from where he can cut at me, so I can just straight away stab at him, stab at his face, stab at his, can cut at his arms, wherever I like. I can do whatever I want because he's not threatening me, right? So when he's threatening me, I need to first maybe cut away his sword and then do a thrust, right? So we see that, hold on, let me fix Ash for a second. So you see that ansetzen is very important, right? Holding your tip on your opponent, presenting threat, it's one of the basic concepts. It helps you stay safe. Even if your sword is all the way back at you and he's out of range, you're still saying, like, I am ready to attack. So after every attack, after every basic attack, we want to end up in that position. We want to end up in that idea of I am ready to continue my attack. And if you do something against me, I can react, thrust. Right? So in our basic text. But there's a little bit more to it than that. See, this is assuming that I somehow miss my attack, right? I'm attacking my opponent, but I miss, so I draw back into my guard. You know, I'm attacking my opponent, I miss, I draw back into my guard. I stay safe. But this can be done in attacks as well, right? In straight up attacks, I can actually sort of make it the point that I do ansetzen, right? So if I do it, if I bring Ash back for a second, I'll see if Ash holds up under my assault. I just push on all his joints for a second. Okay. So Ash is in the middle of making a cut. Ash is in the middle of his defense, right? He's doing it moderately well. He is saying, from here, he's blocking himself, and he's saying, so I can cut to practice ansetzen. So even after he miss, I can have my sword on him, and from there I can immediately follow up with a thrust. So the idea is to after my cut, even if I come into contact with his sword, that I push his sword aside and have ansetzen at the ready. So even if I'm a little bit further away, I have ansetzen at the ready. So I can immediately follow up with a thrust. So again, right? He has a sword pointed on me, cut his sword aside here, and thrust in at him. And this can happen relatively, often. So whenever he sets up one of his basic defenses, or whenever he tries to cut against my attack, I can attack in such a way that my ansetzen is here. And this is kind of hard to show without a moving opponent. But there's a little trick to this, right? It's a little trick to getting this right, because if you, and that is to attack in order to do ansetzen. So I'm going to make my attack. I'm going to say my first attack, right? I'm going to try and go for ansetzen and then a thrust. So my first attack isn't going to be at him. Last week we told about the parts of the sword, and we talked about the leverage, right? So if I can get my strong against his weak, I will have an easy time pushing his sword aside. So what you get is, if I want to ansetzen, I don't want to attack strong against strong, because then it becomes a contest of strength. Right? Now, Ash here is not very strong. I could probably win that, probably. But I will have an easier time if I aim for his weak. I don't want to get strong against strong. I want to get my strong against his weak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack his sword. He's holding his sword forward. He is maybe practicing ansetzen. That's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack his sword where I get my strong against his weak. If he is attacking me, right, I'll extend his arms for a bit. So he is attacking me. I can do the same thing. So I can put my strong against his weak, push it aside. Right? So I'm using both leverage of my sword and the momentum of my cut to put it aside. And from there, we're going to go into a separate technique. So how you can practice this at home is ideally if you have someone to practice with. In the end, sword fighting is a sort of, I don't want to say team sport, but you can't do it by yourself. You need an opponent, right?
It's distinctly not a team sport.
It's distinctly not a team sport. But all the same, you'll need someone to practice this if you really want to get this. And what you want is one person to be doing the attacking, and after every attack, the defender is going to try and defend, but the attacker needs to attack in such a way that every time he attacks with his tip on his opponent, whether that is in a bind, so where the sword clash together, or where I cut his sword away, and then I attack him. And like I said, you get this when you when you attack his weak?
If you want to practice alone, I suppose the best thing you could do is just practice cutting to ansetzen, cutting into Langenort from whatever your choice of cut, because it can come from any direction, and then immediately going into a thrust.
Yes.
So what I recommend and what I personally do is I'll cut into a straight thing, preferably off to the side a little, because you're imagining you're trying to displace your opponent's blade. You're trying to take the middle line, as they would say in fencing, and then you want to go straight in. So make it a nice strong cut. You don't want to go like a limp thing. You want to go strong. Hold your structure with the tip forward. It's very important that you maintain the structure so that your arms are not straightened. They're still bent and providing that support you need to push in.
Yes. So you really have to cut in there. In order to do ansetzen properly, you do need to displace your opponent's blade. And while I want to get the maximum leverage I can, I can't get that if I don't go in with force. If I go in with no force, I need to go in with force, right? I need to cut in such a way that. Sorry, Ash, put you aside for now. You won't stand. You won't. So I need to cut in such a way. He's
not going to survive that hit.
Yeah, exactly. He's not going to survive such a hit. Where I want to push the blade aside. And one thing very important with this is that you really cut to the left and to the right. So when I cut from my right shoulder, I cut into the left guard. And that's how you really get that push in there. Too often do I see cuts like this, where people stand in the middle, like with their sword straight forward. And then they're like, yeah, but I'm getting pushed aside. Because when your sword is straight forward in the middle, right over your line of attack, then it takes only the smallest amount of displacement to displace your sword. Whereas if I place my sword to my left, it takes more displacement, more effort from my opponent to push my sword aside. So that's where I want to cut to. I want to cut, and into the bind, I want to end up there. Right? And then we flow into the follow-up technique, which is the thrust. But the thrust has a name, and there's a trick to the thrust. The name of the thrust, there's actually two, is called the Zwei Hangen, or the two hangings.
Technically, there are four hangings, right?
Technically, there are four hangings if you count left and right, yes. But they say two, right? So what the Zwei Hangen are, is that they basically start from this ansetzen cut. I cut with ansetzen, I end with my sword on my opponent. But I end with my sword on my opponent in a bind. So I have bound with my opponent's sword. Sorry, bring him up again. So I have bound with my opponent's sword, and I'm here. I'm ready to thrust. But here's the thing. If I thrust from my arms, right, I place all momentum forward. All that effort I put into cutting his sword aside with my first cut is not there anymore, because all my momentum is forward, which means that my enemy only needs to, even if he has a very small leverage, even if his tip is at my strong, he only needs this very small amount of force to push me aside. That's really easy, because like if he pushes me 5 degrees off, sure, it's very small. It's like a few millimeters when it comes to my strong, but it's a number of centimeters when it comes to my weak, once it reaches my tip, right? And it takes only 5 centimeters to miss my opponent. So I don't want that. I need to anticipate that. If I'm going to thrust at him, he's going to try and parry me aside. He's going to try and displace me. He wants to push my sword aside. So instead of thrusting from my arms, what I want to do is I want to hold my arms as rigid as possible, because I want to be able to push back against his sword. He's pushing against my sword. I want to push back. But how am I going to thrust in then? With my knees. So I simply lean into my knees here. I hang onto his sword. So I am here. I have done my ansetzen cut, and I hang onto his sword. That way I provide sufficient push onto his sword that he can't displace me easily. Once more. Yes, his ansetzen on me. I cut my ansetzen against him. Right? I hang into his sword. If you notice, all the movement here comes from my legs. I'm not even stepping forward. I'm just hanging in there. I can take a single step forward if I want. If I need that extra distance, I can extend my front foot. In this case, my right foot. If I do it over my left foot. So again, cut ansetzen. Here you notice I don't have enough range, but my strong is against his weak. By holding my arms rigid, step in, lunge in. And as you notice, the rest of my body doesn't move. Only my legs do move. And it's that by holding my arms rigid, he doesn't only need to push against my hands, he needs to push against my entire body mass. Right? My hands weigh very little, and he can push that aside. But my whole body weighs 100 odd kilograms. He's not going to move that. Not with his weak against my strong. So yeah, that's the first of the Hangen. Fran, anything to add?
Actually, yeah, I would like to also point out that if you need that extra leverage, say you're a bit of a lighter person, you're a bit smaller, and leaning in through your knees, putting your body weight forward through that isn't enough, because say you're fighting a much bigger guy, he's stronger than you, he could probably lift you with one arm if he needed to. A way to help compensate is actually to bend over at the waist to put some extra weight on it. I'm not sure if Sasha can demonstrate that because he's never had to do it. He's
no.
The strength there.
But I understand what you mean. It's like this, where you here, and rather than simply moving your legs forward, you also move your body forward. That's what you mean?
Yep. You lean onto the sword with your whole body weight. Bend at lunge with the legs. Bend at the waist. Put your weight onto the sword. So
yeah, you really hang onto the sword.
Yeah, if you're a bit smaller guy, I've had to figure this out because I'm a much smaller guy than Sasha is. We are like opposite ends of the spectrum. So if you think that you don't have the mass, the strength to do it, then leaning over at the waist helps tremendously.
Yes. I strongly recommend, again, getting a partner to try and practice this, because you can really feel the difference when your partner is trying to push back.
If you don't have a partner at the moment, there is one exercise I do have for getting the idea of feeling how this is supposed to feel. Is that you go into the wall, go up to a wall, put your hand on the wall, and just like lean onto it. Don't push it with your hand, but lean your body weight onto the wall.
Like this.
Yes.
Am I doing that right?
Yep. So it gives you the idea of you're not pushing with your arm, you're not pushing your shoulder, but you're putting your body weight into it. Sometimes in class we do this with students. We like have them push each other with their body weight, and you'll be amazed at how little time it takes for them to figure out that, oh, pushing my arm doesn't work.
So what the exercise, what we do is basically as follow, where you take your hands and you put them together like this, cross them over, left over right, or right over left if you're left-handed, and you put your hands against the hands of your opponent. Right? You put your hands against the hands of your opponent. So your opponent is exactly the same, but backwards. And the idea is that we always say, okay, you have to keep your arms rigid, and you push with your body weight. So you push forward like this. And the other guy is supposed to resist you up to the point of holding you in place. So you should be able to move him, and your opponent should let himself be moved. Even if he could hold you back, he should let himself be moved, but it should be at the maximum of your pushing power. And you'll notice that you should push from your leg, and you extend until you can't extend anymore, right? No stepping required. Then, at this point, your opponent should start pushing back. And again, you resist him as best as you can, and you lean into your rear leg here, right? And at that point, he should be extended to the point. And then again, push in, and he pushes back, and you push in, and he pushes back. And so you get a sort of circular movement, or a figure 8 movement sometimes, where as I push in, I push up. But then when my opponent pushes, he pushes up as well. So you get a sort of figure 8 movement where you're moving back. And it's a great exercise to teach people how to push, not using their arms, but using their body weight, right? Because that's what hanging is about. So if you have a partner, you can do this as well. You can stand next to each other, ready, your dominant leg forward. It works just fine if your opponent is left-handed and his left leg is forward. It's fine, because you don't need to move anyway. So push, push, push. That's the exercise he was talking about.
Yep. So if you don't have a partner, just try it on a wall. Just get used to the idea of pushing.
Yeah. And you can also put 2 hands on top, and you can push against the wall. And the idea is not that you sink into your arms, right? The idea is to keep your arms rigid. You push into a wall, push from your legs, and you'll notice that you're pushing from your rear leg then. All right? So.
Yep. Okay. So that's just the exercise for getting you used to the Hangen.
Yeah, the Hangen, pushing from your leg from Hangen, right? So yeah, the actual exercise for Hangen is then you cut against your opponent, or I dry cut with the ansetzen. And remember, this needs to be a firm cut. And then I lean in with either a small step or no step at all, keeping my arms rigid. And again, I don't want to stretch my arms all the way. Here I have no power. Here I have power when it's bent. So here I have power. I lean in, right? Make an imaginary attack against an imaginary opponent. But if you have an opponent, cut in, point at him, and you can lean. And you know, this doesn't have to be like some sort of like kind of attack. You can simply lean in till you tap him on the chest with your sword, and that's it, right? So cut, lean, while your opponent tries to resist you. And you'll notice that if your opponent wants to resist you, your opponent will seek strong against weak as well. So if your opponent will want to lift up his sword so that his strong will go to my weak. And then you'll notice, yeah, like I said last week, there's almost no stopping that. But there's follow-up techniques that you can do from there. Most notably, you can do mutiering. But that's another story for another time.
That counter is a lot harder than you would think. I was doing sword and buckler with sparring, and one guy came in with this perfect Hangen, collected up my sword, collected my buckler, nothing I could do about it.
So the idea really, and when you do it, it's really just fast. It's where you're in, cut, and then lean forward. It's almost one movement. Almost. Right?
Yep.
So cut and then move in. Get a little bit of that stutter step in there, but that's okay. So yeah, that's the Hangen. And of course you can do this over left. Right? I can attack from the left, ansetzen here, and then Hangen in here. Standing against my opponent, cut, and then hung in here. And the same principle goes. My beheaded. My hands, my arms stay rigid, and I simply lean in with my leg. Here you go. So yeah, Hangen. It is a tricky technique, I find, to understand. But once you got it, it can be quite useful because it's really good at overwhelming your opponent. Right? You cut in, then you just lean in. Anything to add about Hangen?
The left Hangen, maybe we should point out that your arms are crossed, so you're a lot weaker on the left. So, while if you're cutting from the right, you can extend much further into your initial cut.
Yeah.
But if you're cutting from the left, you'll notice that it doesn't feel right. You don't have the same structure. So, my only piece of advice is to cut shorter than you normally would. So hold the sword a bit close to your body. You don't have the range because you don't have the structure to make it strong.
No, I would agree with that. The idea is Ringeck very explicitly states that when you cut from the right hand, right, from your right side, from your dominant side, when you end your cut, observe that your arms aren't crossed. Whereas if I cut from the left and I end my cut, my arms are crossed. And he says very clearly, like, fence from your strong side, right? Because fence from your dominant side, because that's where you're strong, right? If you're right-handed, fence from your right. If you're left-handed, fence from your left. Because then you will have the strength to overcome your enemies. Yeah. I want to see and try if I can get him into a second Hangen. Because the second Hangen, so the first Hangen is from the right and from the left. It's against his fluke. It's against either cut one against cut one or cut one against a defense. But if my opponent cuts cut 2 or 3, hold on, let me see how.
That is the Unterhaus from below.
Yeah.
Following and forgotten.
Right, he's right-handed. Sorry, I need to. You can do it. You can do it. I believe in you, Ash. He needs to. Right, his arms are also crossed. That's cool. Right, as he comes and attacks me from below. So Ash is attacking me from below. He's attacking a little low. You can go a little higher. There we go. That's nice. He's attacking me from below, right? And he's coming in and he aims to cut at my head. And that's almost uncanny how that is almost exactly like real Ash. Okay. So what I can do is I have placed my basic defense up here in an ox, but I can also, in that basic defense, I can also practice my ansetzen, right? So I can thrust in here as well. And then I can do the Hangen, and it's basically the same thing, only now from the ox, where I lean in and thrust at his lower abdomen. Right? So he cuts me high here. I block that, practice my ansetzen, lean in, hang against his sword, prevent his sword from coming. This also works if I'm the attacker, but again, if I'm the attacker, he will likely more defend. Oh goodness, this is going to work. You can do it. All right. So he will more likely defend against my attack from below. Right. So I attack him from below, but what I want to do is I want to push in, and again, I probably want to defend a little higher. This is a challenge. You'll probably want to defend a little higher, because I will likely attack a little higher. And again, I want to cut in with a firm cut, practice my ansetzen, and thrust in from there. This is basically when you have someone in ox against ox, right? Over here. And again, if I am at his weak and he is at my strong, I can lean in and lunge from there. So it's the second Hangen. It's very similar to the first Hangen. I honestly, in my regular classes, like 80% of the time I forget to teach it. So consider yourself very lucky that I'm very well prepared.
I disagree. You always bring this one up.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like...
We don't practice it that much, but I distinctly remember doing this a lot.
Okay. Wow. Stand corrected. Cut. Lean in. And again, my arms are up here, but they're rigid. The same principles apply. Rigid. Step in. Push with my body. And if you're smaller, you can lean in with your hip as well. So yeah, the Zwei Hangen. Very interesting technique. And it really, for me, it really symbolizes the principle of ansetzen and attacking, ending with a threat on your opponent. And you just simply see like, okay, I attack, I end with the threat of my opponent, and I simply have to lean in to attack him successfully. Right? Ron, anything to add about the Hangen?
The upper Hangen? Not really. I mean, technically, you could use it. We could say you could use it against an opponent hiding in ox, but there are better ways to approach that problem.
Sure, but that's for advanced stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, if you need to attack someone who's hiding in an ox, this is also an option. It's
one way you can approach someone.
Yeah, it's the same thing as if your opponent's sitting in fluke and you cut down. This is in ox is high, so you just cut from below.
Yeah, and again I can aim at his, like he is hiding in ox. He is practicing his ansetzen. He is shaking no, but so from here I attack him from below and then up here. So yeah. We take a basic attack, we apply ansetzen, and then we follow up with Hangen. Very good. Very good. All right. So for our next topic, second fluke you go. For our next topic, we were talking about Nachreisen. And Nachreisen is also related to ansetzen and a failure of ansetzen at your opponent's part. Because like I said, if I am not presenting a threat, I'm pointing my tip down to the right of my opponent. This is a terrible guard to be in. From here, my opponent is basically free to attack me or whatever. There's some cuts I can do from here. I can like tap his sword aside, or can maybe lift my sword up, but nothing directly offensive and nothing overtly powerful. Like if I stand in my omtak, I'm basically telling you like, hey, you come to me, I'm gonna whack you in your face, right? So he needs to do something about it. But if I stand in this guard, this is not really a guard. This is a guard. This is Shankut, but this is not really a guard. Maybe after I've made a cut, then I'm free to attack. So what I do is, I, as a good sword fighter, am practicing my ansetzen, right? I am facing my opponent. I'm facing the dreaded Ash, and I'm practicing my ansetzen. No matter what guard I am in, I'm in fluke, I'm in ox, right? I'm practicing my ansetzen. I got my tip on him, right? And my opponent is not a very skilled sword fighter, right? You will encounter not very skilled. Maybe he started in ansetzen, right? Because it's very natural to just go like, you get back. You point your sword at your opponent and you're like, stay away from me, right? But then when he intends to strike, what he does is he raises his sword up. Raises his sword up to strike. But I'm ready. Like I said, I'm in ansetzen. So as he moves his sword up, as soon as his tip is away from me, I can follow him in. Right? And this happens at the same time. I can't show you that at the same time. You'll have to trust me. Okay, trust me. He raises his sword up to thrust, and I go thrust.
Sasha, I think maybe we should start by defining Nachreisen here first.
Sure. Okay, that's probably a good idea. So go ahead,
Yeah.
Fran. What is Nachreisen?
Oh no, you are the chief instructor here.
Fine. All right, Nachreisen. It's attacking your opponent when either as he is preparing for an attack or after he has completed an attack. Right? There are these small moments where I'm not presenting threat at my opponent. So I stand in fluke. Very good. I want to attack you with cut 1. And notice that for a moment, I have to go into vom Tak because I can't directly cut from fluke. I can't make a hewing movement. I can only thrust from fluke. So if I want to cut from fluke, I first have to go to vom Tak. And from there, I can make a cut. So if I'm in fluke, right, I have to raise my sword up. But also, if you notice, there's a fraction of a moment where I'm vulnerable. So now my sword is pointed at you, but as soon as my sword is no longer pointed at you, we have that whole idea of I'm no longer presenting a threat. For that slightest moment, I'm going up, and from there, I'm cutting in. So from that moment, if I am standing with fluke against my opponent, I see, oh, he's raising his hands up, I can thrust in. And I raise my sword high so that I'm defending against his inevitable cut. So I'm standing here, he raises his sword up high, and I can cut here. And if his sword had not fallen backwards but forwards, right, he would have hit my sword, my crossguard. More likely like this, but yeah. So the principle of Nachreisen is attacking someone as he is preparing his cut or after he has completed his cut. Like I said, if I'm facing a less experienced opponent who doesn't practice ansetzen, one of his cuts might look like this. Right? He will cut strong, but then he ends in this guard where he is facing backwards. At that point, he is open. In fact, he has been open from here and onward. Right? His cut is not even done yet, but his tip is no longer aiming at me. It is in movement. It's in motion. His sword goes this way, and if I'm ready, I can lean back, let his cut miss me, and then thrust in. There are 3 specific Nachreisen that are mentioned. 3 specific situations where Ringeck says, this is Nachreisen. From that, we have extrapolated the theory of Nachreisen, the concept. But the 3 specific situations are as follows. Your opponent stands in fluke, and he raises his sword up to ox to attack. Here. That's your moment of opportunity. So he stands in fluke, he raises up. So what you need to do is, I stand ready in fluke, and as he raises up his sword, I thrust in. Right? So either from here, thrust in over left, or from here, thrust in over right, thrust to the center if you must. But yeah. So there's that moment of opportunity from here to here. Right? Like I said, you will want to thrust into an ox because you will want to be able to defend against his cut. He might probably isn't instantaneously dead, even if you hit him in like the throat or the eye. Like even if gravity is just going to do its work, right? If I stand in fluke, thrust high, and then defend against any attack that may follow. So yeah, from fluke to vom Tak. Ringeck says that's the first situation where an opponent might be weak. Second is after the attack. So if I'm in vom Tak, I can cut at my opponent, and he says the swing follows through. Here, I am weak. I'm open. So you can thrust at me. If you're ready with the ansatz, you can thrust me. Finally, he says, if your opponent is in Langenort, right? Langenort, and he intends to thrust at you. So if I want to thrust from Langenort, like my sword is all the way extended already. So first, I must withdraw my sword. I must go from Langenort, from my guard, where I extend my arms all the way forward, to the guard at my hip, Flug. From here I can thrust. So as I pull my sword back, that's a moment of weakness. You can follow your opponent in. And again, with that cut, with that thrust, I recommend scooping up his sword so that if he follows through with a thrust, right? So if he's in Langenort, hold on. Langenort is always the most annoying guard to put Ash in because everything is extended to the max. So I need to really, you can do it, but I really need to put in all of his joints. Right. So here he is in Langenort, right? And he pushes back into Flug. From there I can follow him in. But observe, I catch his sword with my cross guard. Because if I don't, I thrust him, like I said, he will not be immediately dead. The fact that, you know, what you see in some movies, that you cut a guy and he falls down dead, or heck, in most movies, you shoot a guy and he falls down dead, doesn't happen like that. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. It keeps you alive, even for fatal wounds in the heat of combat. Somebody might just have enough strength to make one final attack, like with my last breath I spit at thee kind of idea. So I want to catch his blade, like the ansetzen we did just the other week. So I want to push him, and then push his blade, catch it with my crossguard, and thrust from there. All right. So three specific moments where he's weak. One, Flug, to vom Tag to cut, and then Langenort to Flug. And you can do this in a little 3 routine. You start in Langenort, you pull back to Flug. Okay, I get attacked. Then I bring it back to vom Tag. Okay, I get attacked. Then vom Tag, I cut through. I get attacked again. And then my opponent goes into Langenort. And I get ready. And my opponent pulls back, and I thrust in. Okay, and then my opponent, I start again. And then my opponent races to vom Tag. I thrust in again. And then my opponent cuts, lean back, thrust in. Right, so 3 moments, 3 very specific moments where you can, where your opponent is weak, according to Ringeck. Honestly, if you ask me, any time is the right time. Like before any attack, you see an opportunity to attack him, right? Sometimes your opponent stands in vom Tag already, but he's like, right? Raises his sword behind. He makes the fatal mistake of stepping first. That's just asking to be thrust into your mask. So yeah, just thinking.
Just thinking. I think one thing about the Nachreisen where your opponent throws a cut and then you step in to attack him. The important thing I think that a lot of people don't get is the point at which you start moving. We should also point this out. You do not begin your thrust the moment your opponent has finished his movement. So if he's pulling back from Langenort into Flug, you don't start moving the moment he's like reaching the end of the motion. You have to start moving at the start of his motion. So if he's in Langenort and he starts pulling back into whatever prepare attack, you must start following him the moment the tip of his sword starts returning to his body, starts approaching his body. That's your moment of opportunity. That's when you rise after his attack. Similarly, if he throws a cut and he misses, you should already know that he's out of reach, that he's not going to hit you. And then your rising after comes not when his sword has hit the ground, because at that point he's already in guard, he's already ready to cock and attack again, but rather the point where his point can no longer threaten you. Maybe it's already past through Langenort, because remember, we're supposed to cut through Langenort. The moment it dips past that, that is the moment of opportunity, not when he's already reached the ground. And that's one thing people make a mistake in training, is that they wait for their opponent to complete the action before taking their Nachreisen attack. And if you train in that way, you will get it wrong, because you will have always missed your moment of opportunity.
Yes, perfectly like that. Yeah. So if you look at this again from a threatening point of view, if I stand in Langenort itself, okay, it's threatening. It's not really threatening, but it's threatening enough, right? But at the moment I start pulling my sword back, that's when it loses its threat, because Langenort is threatening because I can step in and lunge forward. But the moment I start pulling my sword back, I can't step in and lunge forward anymore, right? That's when my attack can begin, because the threat ends. Likewise, from Fluke, right? There's only no threat as long as my sword is in motion up. Once it reaches its pinnacle, right here, now it can start moving down again, right? So if I attack when he is already in vom Tak, then I'm just asking for a beating. So it is exactly what Farhan says. I must attack as soon as my sword starts moving back. I must attack as soon as the sword starts moving up. And I must attack as soon as the sword passed my... Because even from here, like I said, this is not an ideal guard. It's not even a real guard. But I can still do stuff from there. I can still cut from there and stuff like that. So even if I'm here, if I am static, if I'm still, and you attack me, I can still move against your attack. But if I, the weak fighter, am moving, in my motion, I am weak, right? In my motion, I'm fragile, I'm vulnerable. It's only at the end of my movement that I regain my strength again, because then I regain options for attack. So once I am committed to a particular action, that's when you can abuse that commitment. But once that action is complete, try something else.
At the same time, I think we should point out as stress for people who are fencing that some people are tempted to not commit to their actions because they're scared of being hit. You know, in Nachreisen, say, oh, if I commit too much, I'm going to get attacked, I'm going to be countered. But at the same time, if you do not commit to your action, that's when you get countered. If you commit to your action properly, it makes it harder for your opponent to attack you.
Yeah, true. But that's why I say, like, this is the difference between a beginning sword fighter and an experienced sword fighter. The experienced sword fighter knows how to place an attack where the commitment leaves minimal openings, whereas an inexperienced sword fighter might commit to actions which leave them wide open. Like I said, if I am standing here and I commit to a Zornhau, right, there's not a lot of opening in there. You first have to deal with that. My range is good, my measure is good, my speed is good. You have to deal with that. But if you have a beginning fighter who's doing the same thing, but misses and swings through, that's vulnerability. So if you want to prevent Nachreisen, don't not commit to your actions, but rather commit to good actions that won't leave you vulnerable. That said, it's still possible to be Nachreisen. Like,
it's always possible.
It happens to me.
If it wasn't possible to do it to everyone, it wouldn't be a concept in Lichtenauer.
The only tricky part is, and this is really tricky, and you gotta be ready for it. Like, if I stand in Fluke and if I'm not paying fullest attention, because honestly, right, I stand in Fluke, I want to cut. How fast is that? Right, from here you have maybe 3/10 of a second, 3 or 4 tenths of a second to attack. Right? So it's really a short time. But yes, if I cut from fluke, right, there's this slight moment where my sword is off you, and you can definitely attack and move against me in that manner. But again, a less experienced sword fighter might make a bigger swing, or make it a larger action, take more time in doing it.
Oh, there was a fantastic example of this that came out of China the other day. They were holding a HEMA tournament, and it was this longsword guy against a guy using a Miao Dao, the Chinese longsword. And the longsword guy was just making huge flourishes before his attacks. Now, that was like the perfect example of when you're going to get Nachreisen. And he got stabbed every single time he did it. Every time he stepped in, he was doing this big flourish. And you can see you're not threatening anybody when you're doing that big flourish to attack. And that was the perfect example of Nachreisen in action.
Yeah. So especially against if you are a beginning sword fighter, you might think, yeah, but what if I go like, whoa, swing my sword left and forward, right? How are you going to get through this, right? I can keep cutting, and then like make little 8 cuts, or swing, or like, it's always like that. Okay, not only is that super easy to stop, but there's also like, all right, I'm threatening. I am not threatening. I am threatening. I am not threatening. Threatening, not threatening. Right? So you're continuously moving through vulnerable, not vulnerable movements. Whereas if you just stand with your tip forward in a fluke, then you're basically just saying that it's not perfect, because your opponent can still learn to do something as fluke, but at least you're always threatening. Sorry, I've seen too many people do that. It's like, but what if I do this? Yeah, the ultimate defense. It's a shield of blades, right? You can't
in
stop
all
me.
honesty, I prefer that over the Ash's crab defense, where he just gets out on the floor.
Yeah. Oh man, don't remind me. Okay.
Okay. I don't think we have questions in the chat today. Faris is surprisingly quiet, so
All right.
he's not asking anything. So, do you have
Any
anything
of
else
our
things to say?
other viewers?
Nope.
Faris? Do we have other viewers?
We have other viewers, but they're not asking questions. So,
all right. Well, very well. Other viewers, if you have questions, ask me questions. All right. That's why I'm here.
If not,
is not a. I mean, this is largely a one-way transaction, but it's not a complete one-way transaction.
what we could do, if you're done with Nachreisen.
I am done with Nachreisen.
Yes. I think there was a question last week we got from Faris that we couldn't get to because we were running like long on time. We could probably spend a few minutes answering that.
Sure. If you recall the question.
I do recall the question.
You do recall.
I was talking to him about it earlier in the week. I probably get your advice and your thoughts on it. He was asking, how do you determine what length of sword is suitable for you?
Oh God, I think you can better answer this than me. Go on a silver rampage.
No. I've basically my only advice for getting a sword that suits you is find a sword that you like, and the only way I can think of is basically try as many swords as you can, and buy the one that you like. And if you don't have a wide variety of long swords or faders or rapiers or whatever around you, I'm afraid you're just gonna have to keep buying them until you find one that really suits your personal traits, or something that feels good in your hand.
Fine. I will give you my since the answer of just buy all the swords is probably not terribly helpful.
No, it's not.
I will give you my general measures for a sword, right? So generally, what I usually say is you hold the sword by the cross guard, right? And a long sword should reach your ear, either the top of your ear or the bottom of your ear, So this fader is kind of long, even for me. But I'm long. It's probably good length for me. I don't have my other swords here. I can't demonstrate. But a one-handed sword, if you're looking for a one-handed sword, you should instead be looking at your shoulder. The tip should be slightly above your shoulder if you want it slightly longer. Mine is slightly shorter than my shoulder because I like it. I like the way it felt in my hand. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely something about what Farhan says about getting a sword that feels good to you, right? That's very important. Then length and stuff like that doesn't really matter. But at the same time, if you really want to measure from you have your arm hanging next to you, measure from your the nape of your finger all the way to your ear, and that's about the length of blade you want. All right. You can go longer than that. I've seen plenty of people who have, but then it tends to sort of become top heavy for you. Whereas if you have a shorter blade, it tends to be a little bit more nimble. Yeah, it's really just a matter of feel. Like how does it feel? Do you want to have a short? If you want to have a short sword, then you get a more agile sword. If you have a longer sword, then you tend to get more reach, but at the cost of maneuverability. It's really a
like I said, it fairly boils down to your personal preference in the end.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I think then we're done. There's nothing else going on.
There's nothing else going on. If there's no questions from the audience, then I will say grüß dich. And then let's bring it to an end.
Cool.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. We've been the Zwaardkring. We've discussed ansetzen in the attack and hangen and Nachreisen. And next week, we'll see if we can do something interesting. Anyway, have a pleasant evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Grüß dich.
Grüß dich.